Colin.
This is fantastic news. Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us for Future on 10, envisioning the beer future we want to live in. I'm Colin. I'm the co-founder of Henhouse Brewing Company, and I'm incredibly excited for this event this evening. This is something that's personally really, really important to me. And man, that traffic in the background. This is how you can tell it's a real live stream. I'm incredibly excited about this event because I look like what people traditionally think of as a brewery owner, right? I'm a straight white guy with a beard. This is what the beer industry has been. And so much of the future we're envisioning for the beer industry is more diverse than that, is more inclusive than that, and includes not just people enjoying beer, but breweries owned by a much wider swath of folks who enjoy beer. So I'm incredibly grateful to everyone who's collaborated with us on this beer. There's 3 breweries that I am particularly passionate about and excited about. First, I'm repping for Queer Brewing Project out of London. Lily, unfortunately, could not join us tonight, but is an incredible voice in the beer community that I cannot recommend you follow enough. Second, we're going to be joined momentarily by Teal Hunter of Crowns and Hops Brewing Company that we have a close relationship with. We've done a bunch of collabs, and I talk to Tio almost as much as I talk to my mom. So me and Tio are very close like that, which I appreciate. And then finally, Shyla from Bow and Arrow Brewing Company down in New Mexico will be joining us. And this is a representative sample of the brewery owners that we want to not only support through promotion like this and learn from, but economically support. Hence, we're trying to bring their beers to you such that these businesses can grow and thrive. In the interest of this being a learning experience for the straight white guys in the room, my hope is to shut up and listen. I think that these folks are folks that we can learn from. And our host this evening, Miss Tiffany Patton, is the co-director of Real Food Media and just incredibly involved in leading in educational programming, communication strategy, engagement, internal operations at Real Food Media, as well as producing and co-hosting the Real Food Reads and Foodtopia podcasts with Tanya Carson. I want to make sure that I'm reading this off of the script to get this very impressive list off. Tiffany serves on the Heal Food Alliance Steering Council, the Oakland Food Policy Council, the Local Food and Farm Bill Steering Committee, and the Center for Urban Education about Sustainable Agriculture Education Committee. Tiffany, I'm incredibly impressed with that list and super grateful that you are here to host for us tonight.
Thanks so much, Colin. As one might be able to tell, I like to be involved in everything. And so that's why I'm a part of so many steering committees and councils and education committees. I'm really passionate about food and agriculture and making sure it's delicious for everyone and is like nourishing to everyone who enjoys it, but also everyone who works to bring it to our tables. And it also supports like a diverse ecosystem. And so that's what my work is about. And I'm really excited to be here with y'all to talk about beer. It's not something we talk about really in the like food and agriculture or justice space, but I think that's something that we should be talking about because it involves workers and it involves agriculture. And so it should definitely be included in the conversation. I'm really happy to be doing that with y'all today. So yeah, I think it's time to bring in the panelists, bring in Shyla and Tio. I really want to hear from you and learn from both of you about your journey and how you got here. And so if we could start with Shyla, if you could tell me, what's your origin story? What is the bow and arrow origin story?
Sure. Yeah. First of all, thanks for having me. Really excited to be on this panel with Tio and you. So yeah, I'm again Shyla Shepherd, founder and CEO of Bow and Arrow Brewing out of Albuquerque, New Mexico. This evening, I'm joining you actually from the ancestral lands of my people, the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara Nation in Western North Dakota. We just celebrated our 6th year anniversary. So around this time, we do some reflection and yeah, it really goes back to just initially having a lot of fun visiting breweries, learning about the brewing process, ingredients. I was a social impact investor for almost a decade. So as I learned more about kind of the slow food movement and incorporated just my own experience growing up here on the res, my grandma was very influential in my life. She taught me about our people's and our families' agricultural history. And I have a lot of really great memories of just seeing her in the cornfield and making our traditional foods. So she really ingrained in me an appreciation for the land, its connection to our history and way of life. So coupled with, my love of wild and funky beers, opened Bow and Arrow, like I said, 6 years ago. Left my position with the investment firm in 2013, really to focus on opening Bow and Arrow. So I left my position there with personal investment, support from friends and family, having to personally guarantee our business loan, which included a mortgage on my house, which is really scary, but these things sometimes just have to be done. We opened our doors in February of 2016. So today we really continue to devote time and energy to those things that inspire and motivate us, such as using local indigenous ingredients, telling, and educating people about their significance and history and our connection to it. So I think what really has me excited these days is really sharing and creating those connections and backgrounds and histories. So it ties not only ourselves, but also our customers back to the land and the special place we live in. And other projects too that really keep us excited include things like Native Land, which is a national collaboration, and a current project we're working on that's really spread far and wide pretty quickly. So that's kind of where we've come, where we are today in a nutshell. So thanks again for having me.
Nice. Tio, what is the Crowns and Hops origin story?
What's crap, everybody? Sorry, I had some technical difficulties. I am reporting live from Washington Heights, New York right now. So I'm normally in Inglewood, California, as I am with my partner, Benny Ashburn, who unfortunately could not make it due to another obligation that our brand had. Yeah, origin started primarily with just not seeing any representation in craft beer of Black or brown people in an industry that more or less considers itself to be a community-based business. And as much as it may feel like community to many currently who enjoy craft beer and have their own brew pubs and craft breweries, the more we started to see craft breweries show up in Black and brown communities that weren't owned by Black and brown owners and or had Black and brown employees, and also seeing the people that patronize these businesses located in Black communities, in Mexican communities, and in Asian communities. We just saw that there was an obstacle or something that needed to be, one, identified, and more importantly, addressed. And Benny and I, in our respective paths, she primarily in advertising and marketing, me in creative production, primarily for the entertainment industry, had already exercised what it meant to celebrate, to exalt, to shine a light on things and bring awareness and attention to it. So we saw that just with the investigation that we did in terms of seeing that this was an issue that no one at the time was collectively creating a narrative around and our solutions around. We saw that as an opportunity to use our skill sets in creative production and advertising and marketing and copywriting and artwork and use it to create Crowns and Hops Brewing Company. And Crowns and Hops is based in Inglewood, California. We have just locked down our location, our flagship location, which will be a brew pub right off of Crenshaw Boulevard in Manchester. If anybody is familiar with the area, they know that is the block. It is also a place that that is traditionally known for having a lack of fresh produce. It is looked at as a food desert in many instances, and everyone, I think, in the craft beer community knows that wherever there is fresh produce and markets, traditionally craft beer won't fall very far behind. So Benny and I have been dedicated to solving that. Our mission is to build community, to expand palates physically and psychologically, and also to preserve culture. So congratulations, Henhouse, for 10 years. That's a pretty incredible feat. Well done.
Yeah, well done, Henhouse, and to both of y'all. Something that Colin mentioned earlier, and what everyone else has alluded to, is just like what we think beer drinkers look like, right? We think they're like, or what most people think beer drinkers look like, and what craft brewery owners look like are like Colin, like a straight white man, and that's obviously not the case. And yet there's this huge disparity around who gets to own the means of production of especially like craft beer. And that is not just in craft beer, but is also like in many, many industries. So I come from the food and agricultural space. And so, right, like 2% of farmland in the US is owned by Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And in looking up some statistics for craft breweries, it only is like 12% of craft breweries are owned by POC. And can either one of you speak to some of the challenges that are facing specifically like Black and Indigenous people in the craft beer space? And how did you ever overcome those hurdles? Shyla?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think there's parallels definitely in other communities, but just kind of speaking from my perspective, I grew up on the res here on Fort Berthold, and something that we saw, and I started, being more aware of as I got older and wondered why there were so few businesses here on the reservation. And access to capital is a huge barrier, especially for getting a business as capital intensive as a brewery off the ground. So I would say that's one of the largest hurdles. There's also a situation here on the reservation where our land is actually held in trust by the federal government. So a usual means that an entrepreneur will use to access a loan would be to collateralize their home. That's not an option for you, even if you own your home here on the res. So that also is an additional barrier that's unique to the places that a lot of natives still live. And I overcame that. I mean, I moved off the res, bought my first house, and built up some equity. And when I was ready to open Bow and Arrow, like I mentioned, I actually had that asset, and it was something that I didn't take for granted. I felt like very fortunate to be in that position to have that asset to then use to start a business. So that's how I overcame it, but it's still a big barrier for a lot of other entrepreneurs to join this industry.
Yeah, I would have to agree. When it comes down to it, and you distill this down, chances are it's always going to come down to capital. And when you're talking about capital in this country, you also have to understand that the indigenous people of this country, the Black people of this country, the Mexican people of this country, and I'll just tell you one thing that I'm really doing my best to be very intentional about is calling people for who and what they are. I think we too easily slide into this paradigm of only using acronyms because people are uncomfortable with saying Black, with indigenous people, with the native people of lands. And I got to, take my hat off literally to Shyla for inviting us to participate in the Native Lands Project. As much as we are focused on addressing these obstacles and helping to pull back some layers on them so that people understand Black and brown people just didn't end up in poverty because they wanted to be. They just didn't end up in certain regions of the country because they wanted to. There was redlining that happened. There were reservations where scenarios of ownership couldn't take root, or concepts of ownership couldn't take root in some of these scenarios. And I bring up the Native Lands project because just recently, and it was a bit embarrassing, but I'm grateful that we're able to start having this conversation. We now know that we are brewing beer on the land of the Tongue tribe. And this is something that I've never even heard. I've never even said it enough to even be comfortable enough saying it, as opposed to just grouping it into an acronym. And unless you call out and borrowing this concept from my friends at Fremont Brewing, unless you call out the people that are being affected, you can't deal with the issue. You can't deal with the problem because all these problems aren't the same. It is not one monolithic solve to solve all these problems. To understand, and we now understand that the Tongue tribe was the tribe that was in the Inglewood, LA, Playa Vista, area, all the way on up to, I think, Santa Cruz. And I just wanted to read this. It was, I was just doing a little bit of background because you know how we are in craft beer. If we find something and we go down a rabbit hole, whether it be beer, whether it be the people, and something that we jump in with full feet. And it was related to the enslaved people of the Tongue tribe that were forced to build these missions in California. And it talks about the 18 lost treaties of enslavement by missionaries. And I could go deeper down this concept. When you're talking about a history of this country having authorized the enslavement of the very same people who we're talking about don't have access to resources. And if people can't, after 2020, understand that there's a relationship there, then that's the real problem. And how do we solve not even being able to identify what the problems and the root is, so that we can address what we are now calling out today?
Right. It's funny, like how people think these sorts of problems or inequalities happen in a sort of vacuum, but it's like, no, this is actually the way that the country has been built, right? It was built on genocide and slavery. And so, of course, almost every industry that's going to happen here is going to be unjust because it's built on that terrible foundation. So moving on from that just a little bit, and bringing it back to...
I just like dropped some bombs like immediately. You asked for it, Colin.
So as you know, I come from like the food and agriculture justice space, and there's a lot of movement in that space around like how a lot of like organizing and campaigning for culturally appropriate, healthy food that supports local economies and that treats their workers fairly and is also environmentally sustainable. And that's been wonderful. And I'm wondering, do you see that happening in the craft beer industry at all? And what are some of the challenges for that to happen? Or what are some of the challenges that are like impeding that from happening?
As far as resources to the craft beer, I'm sorry, just to understand.
Oh yeah, like I feel like there's a huge movement for food justice, but is there a movement for beer justice?
Well, I think it, if you don't mind me jumping in, Shyla, I think it does really come down to access to resources. I mean, look at the situation that happened with aluminum recently. We're talking about entrepreneurs that couldn't even can their products because of a lack of access to resources and or those resources being so expensive that we were not able to compete, on just even a local level. So I think there definitely needs to be an evaluation of one, how resources are procured, and also where these resources come from. For example, a lot of these, agricultural, either whether it be in grain or in hops, come from very well established farms that are only able to operate based off of the contracts that they receive in the regions that they're in. If those contracts aren't given or aren't allowed for Black and brown agricultural farmers, rather, to have access so that they can start leveraging and creating scenarios as to where they can grow their farms, to where they can have sustainable farms, then obviously that allows us to tap into that, thereby creating an ecosystem of riding the ship, more or less.
Mm-hmm.
Off mute. Yeah, I mean, also just within our own communities, you know, there's a resurgence in us of relearning and revisiting our agricultural roots. And there's an education that needs to be done on our behalf. Also, as brewery owners, you know, seeking out some of these vendors that might not be in their existing, you know, networks and systems. We've been doing, you know, a lot of research in the areas that we're based in, and you know, one of the things we're really passionate about is highlighting and educating and learning about some of the indigenous ingredients to the place that we live in. And along that, in that line, you know, we strive to support other small businesses and tribal communities. A lot of times these tribal communities operate tribal enterprises. So we purchase some of our raw ingredients from them. We give away some of our spent grain as animal feed. So, you know, like our blue corn, it's a key ingredient in our denim tux, American Pills. We source that blue corn from Tamaya, or the Santa Ana Pueblo. So they source it. They have their own mill. They crack it to our specs. We also use sumac from time to time from Navajo Agricultural Products Industries. And we're willing to pay a premium on these ingredients because we know they're going back to those communities. They're creating jobs. They're helping these businesses to become sustainable. And so I think just kind of educating ourselves, I say ourselves, I'm a part of this industry, but, you know, also other folks who may not have taken the time, you know, who are just kind of using the same vendors over and over. I think there's something to be said about, you know, spending, talking to these communities, reaching out, you know, hopefully even within the Native Lands Project, some of these connections to the local communities might, you know, bear out some enterprises and opportunities for folks who have businesses, or may show opportunity to create businesses. So I think that's kind of our take on it.
Well, one thing I'll also add is this just can't be a black and brown problem to solve. Like you know, just to be straight up, these are problems that exist that are white problems. You know, that are problems that need to be solved. I mean, let's even break that down to the percentage that we're talking about. We're talking about black and brown people being less than 3% of the entire industry. So as much as our efforts, I'm sure, are appreciated and they make for a phenomenal story, we're doing our part. But you know, let's start looking at some of these larger breweries and these larger vendors to seek out some of these vendors as well. You know, it's going to take, you know, a 10 to a 15 or 20% of the existing craft beer industry to start unlocking and investigating the lands and the areas that they're are being.
Tio, you broke up for me for a little bit, so I think I'm just gonna okay. We'll just pause there for that. And I think while Tio rejoins us, it'll be a one-on-one, Shyla.
Okay.
It's really cool to hear about all of your sourcing that you've been doing. It's like sounds so intentional and a way to like create like a beautiful generative ecosystem. I'd love to hear a little bit about like the bow and arrow culture. Like what is the culture that you are trying to create with your beers and also with like this with your tap room?
Sure. Yeah. You know, at a very basic level, our core values are really rooted in, bless you, love of the land, and also in respect. So our love of the land and the special place that we call home I think really shines through in our products and our brand. I think our excitement for what we're doing in our own voices and unique perspective is contagious. We also strive to be a safe space for people to come together and celebrate life and community. We stole a tagline actually from our pals over at Temescal during this pandemic time called "No Jerks," and that's really important to us. Having that level of respect. I mean, even before the pandemic, and now more than ever, amongst team members, customers to team members, and vice versa. So for me, it's been really important to foster an environment of consideration and respect, and I think that really comes through in the culture that we've created at the brewery, in our tap room. So that, those are some of the cultural values, I guess, and our core values that kind of resonate throughout everything we do.
Yeah, and how do you ensure that those values and that culture like carry over outside of the tap room?
That's a really good question. I mean, I would like to hope it does. It's been interesting actually seeing the shift to social media these days through the pandemic. We've all had to change gears and really focus on how we talk about who we are, how we connect to customers and others through our social media. And it's been interesting seeing people tag us and comment us and be so supportive, even though they've never visited our space. So I would like to say that, what we're doing is carrying forward some of these values beyond the beer hall. And I think by people feeling a connection to us and what we're doing without even having visited our space says a lot to me. So yeah, that's been kind of an amazing thing for me, I guess, just from the outside observing that. But yeah, I would say, we're we're consistent in who we are and what we're about. And I think that seems to really resonate with folks.
Nice.
And why we can attract great people to our team as well.
Yeah, you're creating the perfect environment that's like luring the right kind of people in. Tia, so my question was, what culture is Crowns and Hops creating? And yeah, what is the culture you're creating, and how do you ensure that culture goes out like beyond your physical space?
I would definitely say it's the culture of being your most authentic self. I feel like, especially being a Black man, and I'm sure Benny can also attest to being a Black woman in this country, that the feeling of working that muscle of assimilation is exhausting. The last thing that we want for people in our community to feel is they can be, or that they have to be anything else other than themselves. I think that's important, not only from the energy that we hope that people step into our tap room with, but it's also important for individuals on their own individual journeys to understand that they're worthy. It's one of the reasons that we called our company Crowns and Hops, is we want people to understand that they're deserving of the very best. We also ensured that we left an ingredient in our name because we wanted to ensure that we never forgot and left people behind. That was one of the things that we saw very quickly, that many craft beer businesses were doing, that would get so involved and so, how should I say, beer snobby, if you will, that they ultimately started to leave people behind. And we realized that opening a brewery off of Crenshaw in Manchester, the last thing we wanted to people that have never experienced a craft brewery in their life, that didn't even understand or know that this is something that can be made in a community, is to not feel that they're included, that they're seen, and that they can be their most authentic, natural self. And, it's funny, we love the no jerks term as well. We think the concept of being a jerk comes out of fear. It comes out of not feeling a sense of freedom, not feeling like your authentic self. And, we believe that that's a culture that, we're having a lot of success creating, not just in Inglewood, but but also abroad and all over the country.
Mm-hmm. And I know that with your new upcoming like tap room in Inglewood, like how do you feel about when people say like, oh, there's gonna be a craft brewery in this space and it's like a sign of gentrification? Like, what does gentrification mean to you? And also, how does like crowds and hubs, like obviously it's not gonna fit into it, but I feel like there is some sort of tension there.
Yeah, it's, the funny thing is there have been a few reporters that have called us black people gentrifying black people. But then I would quickly ask them, like, what does progress look like to you, and who does progress come from? And that squashes that conversation very quickly. Many people forget that a pub, and I say this, I remind people all the time, is that a pub is an abbreviation for a public house. And right now on Crenshaw in Manchester, all you have is fast food joints, liquor stores, pawn shops, nothing where people can gather, can establish community, can establish true human connections without there being sports, with TVs all over the place. There's nothing that truly speaks to that. So Benny and I are excited to bring a space where people can not just collaborate and gather for beer, but to gather to connect. One of the areas in our space is going to be more of a flex community space that allows for the people of the community to have it as their own. So it's really important that people understand that, I think there was a KCRW interview, and it kind of framed these three coffee shops. There was one white-owned coffee shop. They were like gentrifier. There was one, kind of, piecemeal, put it together kind of, coffee shop. They're doing the best they can, but it looked like it was very, very scrappy and not much capital into it. And they're like, this is homegrown. This is what it should look like. And then they went to another black coffee shop owner who did raise a significant amount of capital to build something beautiful. And he was framed as a black person gentrifying black people. And I think we should take a look at how we frame people of color revitalizing their own neighborhoods. It's something that myself and other entrepreneurs are committed to, is ensuring that we take care of the scope of the people in our neighborhood, so that you don't have to travel outside of Crenshaw district in order to have a beautiful meal, a beautiful pint. You should be able to have that at home, as much as you should have the dive bar down the street. It's about creating a scope that the people can continue to live and feel like they want to buy and purchase and stay in their homes because it's safe and because they don't have to leave.
Nice. Thank you for that. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit and let's talk about what's next, because this is Future on 10. So what do you see next for Bow and Arrow? Do you want to scale? Can you keep the culture and the experience the same if you do? What's next, Shyla?
Yeah, we're actually at an inflection point right now that I'm really excited about. It's definitely requiring us to really change gears. So, a lot's happened over the last 2 years. We've been around for 6 years. COVID hit. Pre-COVID, we were pretty much dependent all on customers walking through the doors and enjoying a pint on premise. And then we were closed for over a year. And so we invested in a canning line, and that's really evolved us as we think about, who we are, what we represent, and really conveying it visually in a brand. So that started to really take off. And I feel like the Bow and Arrow brand has become sort of more fully formed. In the end of last year, we were able to get our new tanks in, which about doubled our capacity. So, we've gone from just being on premise at our tap room in Albuquerque to now, this past week, we sent our first beer shipment to Colorado.
Nice.
And very recently, we worked with Henhouse. Thank you for supporting us in getting our beer to Northern California. And that's just for us, we're in the throes of it. We are evolving and growing and becoming, more visible, which is really exciting. I mean, we've come a long way. And we just continue to, really focus on building a quality team of folks whose values, align with ours. People who are, really excited about things like native land. Because running a business, whether it's a brewery or otherwise these days, is really challenging. So I think now more than ever, focusing on those things that matter, that keep you going, every day and excited to pop out of bed are so important. So yeah, I mean, we're in the midst of it. I'd like to think we're handling this growth really well right now. And I would say, I'm pretty conservative about how quickly we grow, just choosing the right partners to work with as we do grow. And the folks at Henhouse were highly recommended, and just getting to know Colin and his team there has been such a pleasure. And it really makes me feel good to partner with people like that. And I really hope that going forward, we can continue to be choosy and work with people like them, and be selective and not feel forced to work with people whose values don't align with ours. So I do feel really fortunate in this time we're living in to have these opportunities. And I hope that continues.
Yeah, what you're saying reminds me of something that I read in Emergent Strategy by Adrienne Marie Brown, and she was talking about the importance, yes, of critical trust over critical mass, and how it's important. Like if you, when you're like building a movement, like there's so much focus, and I feel like the same is with business too, to like have as many numbers or like grow as much as possible. But really, if you want to go far and if you want to do it smoothly, then you have to have those critical relationships with people that you trust and know well, and then that's how you can make the most like magic happen. Love that you have that book.
Yeah. We did not talk about this at all, which is funny.
We didn't plan that.
But yeah, the reason I have it is because this is probably one of the most important books that I read about intersectionality, about looking through a lens that is not just your own, and especially as it relates to solving problems that may involve individuals that may not look like you, or may not have the same struggle that you may have. It is impossible if you are not collaborating and continuing to unfold. But to answer your question, Benny and I created the Atrial Pills initiative in 2020 out of a result of not being able to qualify for getting any capital when everybody was trying to get funding. A lot of breweries and alcohol producing organizations were disqualified because they were the producers of alcohol. And then when George Floyd was murdered, we began to even really investigate what can we do. So we created an initiative, the Atrial Initiative. It's now an official nonprofit after this year, and we're expanding the scope of it this year. Based off of everything that was going on, we felt that it was imperative for us to start doing something to address the less than 1% Black-owned brewing companies in the industry. It just seemed like we had been having that conversation for far too long. I've only been in the industry for going on about 7 years now. And I would say that, between us, between Black is Beautiful, between a few other initiatives, that it's just now started to take root. And I think in initiatives like that, and initiatives like Native Lands, and initiatives that take, how should I say, more of a lens of how are you solving this problem through a different lens, is I think what we're hoping to do as we open up our flagship. Our flagship brewery is, like I said, is meant to be a resource, and all of our efforts are going to go into that. But I would be remiss by not giving love to organizations like Henhouse, from a brewing facility to collaborate with and to brew beers, and to then work in tandem with their distribution team is what it means to be an ally. You hear that word quite a lot. You hear it used, in order just to tokenize a concept. But rarely do you see people doing the work, like doing the work. And when I say doing the work as it relates to everything we're talking about right now, it is about ensuring that people feel empowered and have the means to make as much capital as they can, leveraging their culture, leveraging their authenticity, and really ultimately rising, all the craft beer ships with one tide that focuses on racial equity. That's really what happens.
You kind of just fed into my next question, which is what can people do to support like a truly equitable and diverse craft beer industry? I think that there's like maybe the easiest thing to do is to, use your money and to buy products that are owned by Black and or Indigenous people. But is there something more that we can do? What does real solidarity like look and feel like to you?
I can jump in. From
Get it, Shyla.
Oh, okay.
No,
yeah, and of course,
just cheering you on, sis.
Oh, thank you. I think it really starts with recognizing, the current dominant narrative, whether it be about, Native Americans or Black people or, Asian Americans, for us. And I think moving forward and launching the Native Land Initiative, we're seeing some of these, a lot of harmful stereotypes coming to the fore, which we knew, are sort of just beneath the surface. People thinking that we don't exist anymore, that we were like wiped out. So I think it's really important to, I guess, inform yourself, do some of that work. And there's this First Nations Development Institute is
I love them.
a 40-year-old Native nonprofit, but they actually did some research on, what are some of the current like widely held stereotypes, so we can actually like understand them and be aware of them. And I feel like that's a good starting point, just like creating that awareness. And then even us as Native people recognizing that and using our own, voices and experiences to, to rewrite these narratives and to tell our own stories, because we are the best people to tell our stories. And I think over time, the more positive, accurate, forward-moving narrative then becomes the story. So I think, that's really important in terms of how other folks can support us. They can ask themselves the following questions, like, how can I use my platform to give voice to others? Ask yourself if you're inadvertently contributing to a false or negative narrative by not taking into account or including, contemporary, in our case, Native people in your work. How can I swiftly and strongly correct false narratives when I see them? These are questions I think that if people are asking themselves, we can start moving, in the right direction, dedicating space and time to learning from, Native people and organizations. And this is part of why Native Land, I think, will be so impactful. And then, donating to some of these organizations, also a key component of the Native Land collaboration. We're not just doing a land acknowledgement. It's really more than that. It's also acknowledging the history, but also the fact that we still exist. We're still here. And then generating those resources to support contemporary Native people and the issues that they're facing today. So again, I think the only way to start changing the narrative is to acknowledge what's out there today and each doing our parts, whether it's us working to change the narrative or other people helping to amplify our stories and perspectives.
Thanks, Shyla.
Shyla, you're a tough act to follow, man. You get it. You get it, sis. You get it. I couldn't have put it better. I think that language is a very important factor to this as well. I think our history, and I think the code to how we got here is in language. And if we let those who choose to not want to deal with the problems continue to be the ones who change and present the language, then we will never find a solution. We will never find solutions if we are not speaking these people's names, if we are not speaking to the things that have happened in our country, and ultimately the solutions that won't just help Black and Brown and Indigenous people, but everyone in this country. The concept of Atro Pills, which is our nonprofit and also one of our core brands, is taken out of a concept of the business case for racial equity written by the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. And it suggests that if we start to focus on racial equity, which means to invest in the corridors that prevent the community from being productive in healthcare, in housing, in entrepreneurship and employment, and education, and in criminal justice reform. If we don't focus on reducing those disparities, we as a community, as a country, cannot ensure that our children at the end of the day are and have the most access to being their most productive selves. And that is the bottom line. We creating breweries and having the ability to raise capital, which we just did. We're the first Black-owned, women-owned, veteran-owned brewery to raise $1 million on the equity crowdfunding platform, which I think shows another path. Thank you. It shows another path to accessing capital, that you don't have to go through traditional means. You can literally go to your own community and leverage your own community, allow your community to take part and participate in your success and not have to go through traditional means to do that. These are paradigms that that live in the UK, that have lived in the UK for years. The majority of startups are supported through equity crowdfunding campaigns. It's new out here in the States. But that said, our goal is to show that one, we need to focus on ensuring that we protect language, that we use and we call things out for what they are, and that we're just radical in the change that needs to happen. It's not going to happen through anything, and that comes out of this. It's not going to come out of anything. We're not honoring those who have been radical for generations if we're not also looking to be radical ourselves. And I think that's how we accomplish it. I think that's what Henhouse has been doing to help us accomplish it, because at the end of the day, this is not charity. This is about investment. This is about investing. This is about investing in our community as a whole.
Nice. And so, okay, one last question before we open it up to Q&A. So for anyone who's listening, if you have questions for Shyla and Tia, please drop them into the chat. But I'd like to know from you, what do you hope for the future of beer? Like, what's your brewtopia, so to speak, and how can we together make that happen?
Brewtopia. That's a big question. I would say that if I'll lighten it up for a minute, that sessionable stouts become a thing again. I think Guinness has literally hijacked the world for having a sessionable 5 to 6.5% stout out there. I don't think they need to have adjuncts. That they don't need to be 13%. I'm 46 years old. I can't be drinking 12 ounces of fucking 16% beer these days. But that said, these brands have also used our culture and leveraged our culture in order to gain market share and to literally dominate the entire style. So in a brewtopia for me, Urban Anomaly, which is our stout, our 6% stout that we have, would be going toe to toe with the Guinnesses of the world, along with I'm sure an amazing bow and arrow stout too.
Nice. Thanks, Tia.
Yeah. I look forward to a time for other women, other Native folks interested in entering the industry to not have to defend themselves for why would you want to be in this industry, and for some of those stereotypes that are still very much existent to sort of dissipate and go away, because it takes so much energy to I'd love to just talk about beer and the challenges we face as brewery owners, because we face similar challenges as any other brewery owner, but to have to consume the time and energy and like emotional whatever of having to say like, yes, I'm native, no, we're not all alcoholics, and actually, and the places we grew up in and the reservations were really beautiful, and there was so much that we got from them. So I look forward to a time when we people of color can enter this industry, and like I said, not have to sort of defend our reasons for wanting to be in it, and just consume like that sort of space, because it's tiring.
Yeah.
Let's just talk about why we're all in this industry and what gets us excited. So I look forward to that. I mean, I think we're getting there, and those of us that are in the industry, Crowns and Hops, like Sky Dancer out of, Oklahoma City, we're networking, we're supporting each other, we're breaking down these stereotypes, we're doing the work. So I look forward to that next generation of breweries that don't have to battle and contend with some of the same issues that we have to today.
Hey Tiffany, it's really comical a lot of times when you'll have some interviews and literally you will have some individuals that will try and pit us against each other, or to try and pit as if the top is this small.
That is some white supremacist thinking right there.
Oh my God, yeah, and I would say, I would agree with Shyla. Until we hit 5%, 10%, which is 900 breweries. That's a lot. That's a lot to have representation, true representation in this country, to where our cultures are probably some of the most celebrated cultures on the planet. To Shyla's point, we would love to enjoy the freedoms of just being business owners, of just being and not to have to worry about the activism. But our reality is that we do have to be activists. We do have to be constant about the problems that have to be solved in order for us to even breach 5%. And that's what we're dedicated to. That's what our energy is. It is exhausting. It's a lot to consider a business plan, and then also the strategy on how you communicate to your industry and to your community.
Right.
But we're here for a reason, and I think that utopia, that craft brewtopia, is not too far away. I think we're chipping away at it.
Nice. Well, thank you both so much. I'm drinking right now the Future on 10 brew, and it's so freaking delicious. Nice.
Hey, Colin is going to kill me. Colin, I had to go down to the bodega, and but shout out to Rob Todd, one of the good beer men in the world. So I got that from the bodega. Left my beer back in LA.
I'm never mad about Allagash White.
Same. By the way, this turned out so. Oh, cheers! By the way, this collab beer is beautiful.
It's amazing.
I'm such a fan. Yeah, the Sabro. All that
Colin knows how I feel about Sabro. Hey, Colin, real quick, talk about that yeast real quick, because that shit is fire, bro.
So I gotta just because I know some of our team is watching this right now, and Sabro is very divisive around here. Shyla, I'm super glad you're on Team Sabro with me. The yeast we use in that beer is genetically modified yeast from Berkeley Labs. It's super cool. It's something we've been experimenting with, and we've used several of their different yeasts. So I'm going to try and not get myself in trouble with any of the chemistry folks who are watching this right now, because I fully don't understand what a thiol is. But as I understand it, it's a flavor compound that we normally can't perceive or access. And this yeast, in addition to just working well as a brewer's yeast, creates an enzyme that separates thiols into such a way that we can perceive them. And you perceive them as this really big, like guava, passion fruit, a little bit of mango thing. And I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it.
Solid.
Dude.
So,
So I gotta start on this Q&A with saying that I have the paradox of choice here. And I'm drinking that right now, and that is just incredibly delicious. And I am super grateful that you sold us some. And then I'm very close to getting into this this aid trail here.
Hey.
So
Hey, Shyla, these designs. Oh my God! Like what? After we do the native lands, you know we're gonna have to do some dope ass shit for our like true collab. Like that's gonna be like the most unique. Like, whoo! Just call it indigenous. Just call it indigenous.
I'm down.
So I want to follow up on a couple of things, because I do think that there's so many like super important concepts that y'all discussed, and I'm super grateful for you doing that. One of the ones that always kind of strikes with me is the access to capital discussion, and I was really happy that we started there, because it's such a big piece of the overall puzzle. I have in my notes, it just says DJ Shadow says it's the money. The fight for access to capital is always one that I find really interesting. Are there, aside from crowdfunding, are there things that you would like to see changed in the industry, or perhaps just the banking industry, that particularly would be beneficial on that line? You know, like what needs to change there? Shad, I was super interested to hear that native land being entrusted to the United States means you can't use it as collateral. Like, that's wild, right? I don't think folks understand how big of a deal that is. So like, what are those things, and what are more of those things?
You know, I just happened upon some interesting summary information on some analysis that the Federal Reserve did on entrepreneurship, particularly as it relates to people of color. They had an interesting list of stats that were sort of glaring to them. I think it was a list of 10. But one of them was just perception of risk of certain, you know, by banks as well. That's a challenging one, you know, to get past, but that's one that they acknowledged exists as a barrier to access to capital. I mean, even when we were looking for bank loans, everyone turned us down. Everyone said, we don't do startups, even though I had equity, you know, and, you know, thankfully we got an SBA loan. So I think that's, you know, a good source for folks, at least in our experience, when all the other banks turned us down. And that's, you know, the Small Business Administration segment of the federal government. But I think, you know, that's a big challenge, just that perception of risk. And I don't know exactly how I mean, I guess you set examples of success is a starting point. So, you know, we're working on that. But yeah, I would point you all towards that study where it was an analysis of some of the current challenges. And also just pointing out that something like 90 to 95%, one of the examples of Black-owned businesses, you know, have less than 20 employees. There's a whole bunch of things that just kind of break down the current state of entrepreneurship here in the United States. So that one I would point you all to as well.
Yeah, I think, you know, I don't have much to add to that because, I mean, Shyla and I are clearly kind of faced with the same dilemma. You know, I think in Benny and I just really evaluating how many craft breweries have come about around the world, you know, whether it's through access of traditional loans from banks or just extremely well capitalized networks. That happens as a collateral effect of whatever your plight or whatever your family's plight has led you to. For the majority, I mean, don't get me wrong. There are individuals that have worked themselves into an ecosystem of having a network of high capital worth. But for the most part, that being evaluated as a high risk on the sheer compound effort of how you arrived or how you have arrived to your current plight is something that does not consider how we've gotten here. That does not consider the unfair practices that continuously did not allow for us to create wealth, even the smallest type of equity from either homes and or businesses. So that has to be investigated, incorporated into you know, these obstacles that get created due to I think the lens that it has been looked at, you know, for years, you know, in this country.
You know, I thought of one more thing. Sorry, one more thing. It plays a significant role is the regulatory environment and in the business models that it will allow. When we first opened in New Mexico back in 2016, contract brewing wasn't legally allowed. So to enter the industry, you were forced to, come up with, I think it was, you had to have a minimum of a 3-barrel brewing system, but there were certain barriers in place that forced you to enter the industry with a certain model that was just inherently more capital intensive. So the regulatory environment plays a big role. I mean, if people are sort of, not beholden to any particular physical location, they might go out and start investigating what is the regulatory environment in certain places and how can it, better set us up for success, So that plays a big role too.
I'd follow up on that with something that I've heard Tio talk about a bunch of times, which is also, access to capital is one barrier, but access to information is a secondary one, right? And beer regulations in particular are crazy complicated, very, very paperwork intensive, and usually come with lawyer fees. Tio, can you talk about where you've seen that access to information be a barrier that could be overcome?
Yeah, I think that's where we talk about how we saw these obstacles as an industry, making access to resources another aspect. If capital is number one, resources within that pool is number two. And I think like we all understand, that there are several fees and expenses that come with retaining the multitude of attorneys and accountants that you need in order just to project that you want to be successful. So, it's one of the things that we're really hoping to develop within Atrill is to be a resource for pro bono services, to have some of these elements spoken to and addressed, so that startups, or rather that startups in the craft beer industry that suffer from the obstacles of having a lack of resources in their immediate network, whether it be attorneys, whether it be CPAs in a family, whether it be investors that are your neighbors. That is an ecosystem that I think we've seen prominent for most craft brewers that are white owned. And not to say that there aren't people of color that don't have well-capitalized friends. I think we've developed it, but I think Benny and I utilized our skill set in media and advertising and marketing to, and I will say there had to be a lot of convincing to our network who wasn't very familiar with craft beer and what we were attempting to do and how to leverage some of those resources. But it 100% is about creating an ecosystem, and I think the environment is amazing for craft beer to be able to create those resources and to make them available to those that are looking to do what we're doing today.
Thank you.
Absolutely. I got a couple of questions from the comments I want to get out to both of y'all real quickly. So the first is Ricardo is asking any ideas on how to include not only Black, Indigenous, people of color, but intersectionally with the queer, non-binary, trans community into the craft scene.
We are also queer owned. My wife and I are the co-founders of Bow and Arrow Brewing. There's a lot of things we found over time are pretty unique. So I think just sharing our stories is, like we keep talking about, I mean, representation is a really powerful thing, and I can't emphasize that enough. So just normalizing that, hey, these two Native women, they're married and, they're like leading Bow and Arrow is a really powerful thing. So I think just putting aside our shyness that we had for the first few years and just being comfortable sharing our story is part of it. So absolutely, there's a place for, everyone in craft beer, and some of us are really like doing the work to pave that way for folks behind us to feel comfortable in this space.
I would definitely advise if people are looking for solutions in that space to look up Kimberly Crenshaw. She is literally the authority on intersectionality. It is, like I said, we're all unfolding in spaces that we currently don't exist in, but we are a community, and we have to continue to unfold and to search for ways to be able to solve these issues, because there are blind spots. We all have them, and unless we're actively seeking to establish community with those that don't look like us, that we share space with, that we are neighbors with, then we're missing a big opportunity there.
I want to pop in and mention something. There's this a field in science called queer ecology, and it's really like looking at nature and how nature is not actually binary like we humans like to think it is. And so I think that's also a really great space to look into. You can apply that to brewing, to anything, but most of the world is actually, it's not binary, right? It's queer. And so, yeah, check out some queer ecology resources.
Word.
So Tia, I want to speak a little bit for our non-present collab partner at Queer Brewing Company, because my older sister is trans, and she's always loved beer and our brewery. She's always been very supportive, but it's always been very clear that like the beer community didn't fit for her. Like she didn't feel the inclusiveness, and when I started talking to Lily and trying to get her to come out here and make some beers out here and support her in that way, and I was talking to my sister about it, it was a light bulb moment for her that like there were breweries out there that look like her, that represent her experience, and it is so much about those of us who have the privilege helping create opportunities for those with less privilege, just opens doors and open minds in really, really direct and really, really empowering ways. I think like I sometimes have to remind myself to not be too cynical about like everything is just about capital, though everything is just about capital. the representation part just creates these very, very direct ripples into like who feels like beer is for them and welcoming of them in ways that are really meaningful.
I'll never forget there was a brewery that backed out of a collaboration. This was years ago. They backed out of a collaboration with us. They were in the South, and they backed out at the last minute, like literally after I flew into town. And their response was embarrassing. They said how embarrassing it was, but they essentially said that their community wouldn't understand why we were collaborating. Their community wouldn't even understand why they were promoting someone who was promoting Black ownership or racial equity. And my response to them was, "Is that the community you really want? a community that wouldn't want to see you grow and develop and become as inclusive as possible." I will say, I would say last year in 2021, they did reach out and offer a pretty huge apology about it. And I think they were able, throughout the investigation of just how we've arrived where we are after 2020, I think a lot of people have understood now that they have to be audacious. Like I mentioned earlier, we have to be radical, and we have to challenge our communities to be radical as well. I think many people enjoy the truth, and I think the truth just lives beyond fear. And anytime we're able to invite and protect space, like you all have been mentioning, that gives us an opportunity to not let fear persist. Fear is a fucking liar. And I think that's what all of us are committed to.
That does lead to a follow-up question that we got from Facebook, which is, how would our scene look different if we
Facebook?
From Meta. How would our scene look different if we achieved racial equity, and would beer taste or look different?
Beer would continue to taste fucking great. That's funny. I don't know if you get this, Shyla. Well, do you do Indian beer? Do you do native beers? Like, no, I make great fucking beer. But just a quick answer is, if we, again, the 8 Trill Pills initiative is based off of the fact that if we focus on racial equity today, the country stands to see an impact of $8 trillion to the national GDP. Not just Black people, not just Native people, not just white people, the country. So in my opinion, focusing on racial equity and accomplishing racial equity, again, is a tide that raises all ships. So specific to the industry, the more Black-owned breweries there are, the more Native American breweries there are, the more queer breweries that there are, the more people see themselves. And you know how it is in craft beer. Once you get bit by the bug, you go seeking everybody's beer out. So that's how it works.
I would like to think that, we're definitely contributing to beer tasting differently. I mean, we make solid classic styles, but at the same time, like I've been talking about some of the indigenous ingredients that we've been infusing into our beers. I would like to think it tastes differently. I think people's perception even of ingredients and flavors is only enhanced when they fully understand its history and its connection to a place. So I think, more than just flavors, but also educating people is part of what we're contributing to the industry and to the beer scene. That makes it unique and a unique experience and unique products that wouldn't otherwise be here if we weren't in this space.
Absolutely. It did. That somewhat ties to this kind of next question that I want to ask, but it is just so frustrating that, like, I'm drinking y'all's beer right now, and both Paradox of Choice and 8 Trill are just tasting phenomenal. They're just so good. And it's, I'm glad that we're having the conversation and trying to progress things, but it feels so unfair to not be able to just spend an hour and a half being like, holy shit, these beers are crazy delicious. Let's talk about them, and to talk about like the new palettes or the new perspectives to beer that you're bringing to someone's palate through like traditional indigenous ingredients. it's super, super frustrating. And that pressure to be a representative of the community, the like first before before you even just get to sell the product, that's like you said earlier, exhausting. Do you feel like that gets in the way of like just enjoying the beer?
I mean, I think it depends on the context. You know, I mean, I'm crushing like our Helles, our Bo Pills right now at the tap rooms. I don't think so. I think when it comes to those things that like make us unique, those are actually some of the things that really get us excited. So not for me anyways right now. I'm pretty pumped. I was exploring actually mesquite pods from like Western Texas and Southern New Mexico. Everybody thinks of like barbecue when they think of mesquite, but they actually have these really beautiful pods that have like this source of fructose sugar that's sort of like molasses like. And you can, anyways, I'm getting really excited about this ingredient these days and its history and its background and connection to our place. So I'm not exhausted yet. There's still a lot to be learned and to share with folks.
Yeah, I'd say that, Benny and I are really focused on the culture. I think we have seen Black culture just get ripped off for generations, just getting pimped out by so many different communities. I think overall, the community in general, craft beer, Black community, anyone that enjoys Black culture is excited to see that we're able to nail core recipes that we're able to present through our partnerships and through our distribution channels, phenomenal tasting beer that they can ultimately align with because it hasn't been there. It hasn't been there authentically. It's easy for a brewery to slap Snoop Dogg on a freaking, can and call it culture, but if that community, if that brewery never contributes to the culture that is missing in the very industry that they're being able to leverage their production capability and their distribution capability, what does that say about the community as a whole and their use of culture? So Benny and I have been really focused on, not just making true to style or the best liquid that we could possibly present, but also to make sure that the community finally sees alignment from its founders and from the company that ultimately they'll be able to visit this October.
I'm incredibly excited to come visit this October.
Shit, y'all get ready. Yeah, the menu that we're really excited about too will speak to the food and the process throughout the Middle Passage, from Africa to Cuba to the Caribbean to down south. And I think Tiffany, you kind of touched upon this in earlier conversations. The narrative of indigenous and people of color and Black and brown people of this country and the foods that we enjoy today are rarely told in the true story and packaged in a way to where people understand it just didn't come out of nowhere. It came through the process and through the techniques of the same DNA that coursed through our veins today. So we're excited to present that as a complete experience, the beer, the food, and the environment.
Nice.
Well, that is getting me incredibly excited to come visit.
I can tell your mustache is starting to grow back, man. It's like starting to like waver out there, man.
I'm just trying to keep the Abe Lincoln look going. So that's what we've got. Questions from the audience. I'm super grateful for both of you, or all three of you, being out here tonight. Is there anything y'all need to plug before we get off here? Tell the people where to find you, where to spend money.
Well, you guys, I just mentioned, dropped our first beers into Northern California recently. So check out your distro footprint. I think as far south as Santa Cruz, through my old stomping grounds for undergrad, San Francisco, the Bay Area, Napa, Sonoma, and look out for more of those. Also, I feel so grateful and appreciative that both Henhouse and Crowns and Hops is joining our Native Land National Collab. So really looking forward to that dropping. Let us know, tag us, follow us at Native Land, and let's generate a ton of resources for Native communities.
Yo, super excited about the Native Lands collab. And Shyla, I don't know if you saw my email, but got some pretty interesting ideas with some indigenous ingredients. So it falls in line with what we're talking about here. So pretty excited about it. Yeah, Benny and I are super excited to really finally lean into our core beers, Freestyle versus our West Coast IPA, 8 Trill Pills, which Colin is rocking on this podcast, and BPLB, which is our flagship IPA. We have a limited edition labeled version of it that will be making appearance in the Bay Area this coming week. Black Joy, and it'll be showing up for the Black Joy Parade that's happening in the Bay Area. So look out for that. That's a beautiful remix of our Black People Love Beer, Brown People Love Beer label. That showcases just beautiful women of color on the label, and just expressing and exhibiting true Black joy. So we're super excited. I'm in New York right now, so I'll be visiting a few friends. We did a few drops out here, so we'll be doing some tap takeovers in Harlem, in Brooklyn, and in Queens. So if you are listening here from New York, look out for me swinging through your borough. And thank you again, Tiffany. Thank you so much for your time.
It was my pleasure. It was so great to learn from y'all. And if anyone's interested in the intersection of food and climate change, or food and public health and food worker justice, check out realfoodmedia.org or follow us on Twitter or Instagram. Thanks so much, Colin and Henhouse.
Dude, thanks to all y'all. You all three of you inspire me and inspire the company, and I'm super grateful for everything.
Thanks so much, guys.
Thank you, bro.
Thank you.
Now
give me that McLean beat.
To get the dance off, I feel like that would go poorly for me.
I need one of those hard McLean beats. There we go.